Alright guys, I hope you enjoy some of this original skirmish gameplay that I actually recorded this week. Today I want to explain some of the concerns I have with the new changes that are coming. This is not going to be a fear-mongering video. It is simply a way to show you how I see the changes and basically what, in my opinion, makes them bad or, I guess, in some cases good. Some of the things are smart, like the core roles being the typical main stats in the game. Other things like the attributes still need some work because they're going to have the same issues going forward. Quick reminder, if you think I make some good points and want the devs to address these things, a like and a sub will actually go a long way in getting them to notice. So first, the thing I want to address is about how the gear change is being seen. We're all kind of in the same boat with god rolls and the budget system being bad, basically. It did not feel rewarding 99% of the time. Which is why when the devs started talking about unlocking the budget and letting those max gear rolls return, we were all pretty much just like, finally. Now, as a disclaimer, all the gear changes are still being adjusted, but I am sure much of it is in the ballpark, so I'm going to actually compare it to one that is actually in the current game. I just want to church it up a little bit. I want to give it its own little stat bars there. And as you can see, it is becoming very close to what we actually get in the new system. And keep in mind, my mod slot is not actually being displayed like theirs with the updated mods. You can see in pretty much greater detail how everything is just kind of staying more or less the same actually. Now if we take into account how the budget and recal system work, it becomes very easy to see that they are not really giving us god rolls like they said they were. What they're doing is really just dropping our base armor, lowering the stat caps, removing talents, removing mods, and basically just kind of combining the taken points with the recalibration points to basically just give us stronger native rolls and basically just apply that to RNG, which basically just results in the exact same rolls as before. But because of the fancy bar they added, it makes it look much more impressive than it actually is. The system is basically the exact same as it was. All they're really doing is allowing the gear to roll recalibrated already and basically putting caps on the stats just to say that we have max rolls. They are not really making the gear god roll as we know it now. They are just kind of fudging the numbers. Now I still hope they're really working on the numbers because, as I will get into later, the value given to these rolls is not going to be considered worth investment. Comparing them to the crit or skill-based stuff we have actually seen, they just really don't compete with that. 6.5% hazard versus 12% crit rolls, that just doesn't feel like a competitive choice to me. To understand why the current system is built poorly, we need to ignore the actual budget part of it for a minute. The budget was not the reason armor and damage killed all the other rolls. It was because it lacked the barriers needed to actually prevent that kind of abuse. All they have now are the base attributes, which means any spot that can roll armor or weapon damage will. This is because, point for point, nothing really beats those rolls. As you see here, most stats fall into a specific value to the player. Currently, the system is putting junk rolls in the same categories as top rolls, and this is part of the diversity problem. Players really have no good options except, for the very obvious ones. I tried to talk about this in an old video actually, because some stats are good and have a reason to exist. They just can't compete face to face in a dance-off because they're not devoted to the gunplay that a lot of players play by. So in order to make them an actual option, they need to be compared to similar choices. Otherwise, the only way to make them have enough value to be picked over these other rolls is that they need to be rolled so absurdly high that it basically becomes a design problem, which is basically what we saw with the hazard protection and the damage to elite rolls. I mean, these stats should have never gotten so out of hand, and it should have required a bit more sacrifice. But that is the problem if you're actually trying to make low priority rolls compete with high priority ones. The amount of power that you have to gain on those stats balloons until it basically hinders the game's design. And this still worries me in some of the dev builds that we saw. And if you go back to some of the things that we currently have, like the weapon mods, almost everyone picks the larger magazine or belt because those are just the greatest returns for the player. Nobody picked reload speed or optimal range because they are just not adding the same kind of value to the overall stat picture that a magazine would. Which is why when I see the weapon handling now being included as a red roll, taking the slot of a crit or headshot damage roll, I think back to basically how it was almost always ignored in the mod rolls, and at most included because of a third or second weapon talent just kind of happening to have it, which appears to be the same boat we are finding hazard protection in now. If I can just choose 12% crit, why would I have any value for something like 6 or 7% hazard protection rolls? You know, the value is just not there. Offsetting the amount of damage I do all the time in favor of stopping a very small amount of damage I take, less than half of the time, is again not something that offers real build value when competing head to head, especially if the weaker stat is actually given even lower rolls. This is why I believe they need to actually refine the purpose of gear rolls. Removing the 3 best main stats does not stop the next set of OP attributes from basically coming loose. What will stop the abuse of crit chance and crit damage, for example? What would give players actual reasons to want some of these lesser rolls without actually making them sickeningly strong? To me, the best way is even with more distribution of stats, which, with the 3 cores out of the way, does make this easier. If you have weak stats just failing to keep pace with other builds, it does not actually help the game. It ensures that only a few options, are used because most players just gravitate towards the obvious choice anyway. Why choose accuracy over crit chance, right? I mean, that's the kind of mentality that a lot of players have, which means that the obscure stats end up being ignored. So some form of separation is actually needed beyond just making stats with massive numbers or only rolling on one single piece of gear. And this is why I am highly in favor of minor stats. Minor stats are basically just a way to provide lower quality gear rolls, but offer them in a way that actually makes players want them. Nobody would, pick throw distance over skill power, for example. But now options that kind of fell on the back burner for a lot of players could actually get their own place to shine, right? I mean, throw distance is not a priority for many people. But depending on your build, if it's just a little bonus that you can get, that might be something you want to actually try to farm for. If Division 2 wants to come out of the gear revamp looking good and actually feeling better about itself, it needs to kind of shake the idea of favoring casuals over, the deep dive, really invested players. I mean, this right here, minor rolls, kind of allows for that. Like everyone keeps saying about how games should be fun for everyone. Even though, as we can actually see, this sentiment does ruin many games. The players who actually hate what is being done with the casualization should still actually be allowed to have fun in the game that they've enjoyed currently, right? An extra layer of grind that many can just choose to ignore, but maybe the min-max elite would actually love, is a way of just doing that. It shows to the community that the game is not just being simplified in a negative way, like we have actually seen with the cuts across the board so far. It actually adds more choice back into the game, but it does not ruin the PvE or PvP content by having things being OP all the time. They are just very simple ways to improve a build without making things one-hit kills or instant wins. It's basically just a little bit of flavor on top. Overall, the upcoming changes do look to make the game different. If that translates to fun, we'll basically just have to wait and see, guys. I would be lying if I said I was not worried the game was getting too simple for my liking. And that's basically the biggest reason why I stopped playing Destiny, because the overall feeling of builds in Division 1 just made Destiny feel very bland. There's just no game with the depth and gameplay that the Division has, outside of hardcore RPG games like World of Warcraft or really deep dungeon crawlers like Diablo. I really hope Massive is paying attention to this portion of the community, because we won't wait around forever. I mean, eventually there will be another game that comes and more or less sweeps us off our feet. What we want is a lot more Diablo and a lot less Call of Duty, and hopefully that is the roadmap to the future for them. We will have to wait and see. Alright guys, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.